Christmas morning came to Plantation wrapped in all the ceremony expected of one of Louisiana's most prestigious estates. It was 1847, and Henri Dufresne had every reason to mark the day with celebration. At 32, he had inherited his father's vast sugar operation just 6 months earlier, rising abruptly from overlooked younger son to master of 3,000 acres and 170 enslaved people. The mansion shimmered beneath imported crystal chandeliers shipped from Paris at great expense, while the rich scent of roasted duck blended with pine garlands throughout the grand parlor. Outside, December brought an uncommon cold to Louisiana. Frost edged the courtyard fountain, forming delicate ice patterns that caught the pale morning light. The household had been preparing for this day for weeks. The kitchen staff labored through the night, producing elaborate dishes destined for the long mahogany dining table. Inside the house, enslaved servants polished every surface until it shone, hung wreaths on each door, and placed candles in every window. The entire estate radiated wealth and cultivated elegance, the kind of display that would have impressed even the most discerning members of New Orleans society. Yet the gift waiting in the courtyard would unravel everything Henri believed about his family, his name, and himself. Henri descended the mansion's front steps with the confident stride of a man newly settled into his inheritance. His older brother, Philippe, had been groomed since childhood to manage Bellera, while Henri had been sent to New Orleans to study law, expected to carve his own path. Yellow fever had claimed Philippe 3 years earlier, and their father followed him to the grave just 6 months before, leaving Henri the sole heir to everything the Dufresne family had built over 3 generations. The transition had been anything but smooth. Overseers quietly questioned his authority. Neighboring planters watched closely for weakness. Henri himself struggled under the sudden weight of responsibility. His 20s had been spent in the relative freedom of the city, arguing cases in court, attending theater performances, and indulging in the cosmopolitan pleasures of New Orleans. Now he was bound to the land, to the people upon it, and to a way of life he had never fully embraced. Charles Beaumont stood beside the fountain wearing the satisfied smile of a man pleased with his own generosity. Charles was Henri's closest friend from his New Orleans years, a successful cotton broker who had helped him navigate the intricate business arrangements that kept Bellera profitable. A few years older than Henri, Charles already showed gray at his temples and carried the relaxed confidence of someone born into comfort and position. "Merry Christmas, my friend," Charles said as Henri approached. "I know you've been searching for someone capable of managing the household. Your mother's longtime housekeeper passed away last spring, and I've heard finding a replacement hasn't been easy. This one comes highly recommended, literate, well-mannered, trained in refined service. Her former owner was settling debts in Natchez. The moment I saw her papers, I thought of you." Henri's attention shifted to the woman standing beside Charles. She wore a plain gray dress, clean but worn, with careful mending visible at the cuffs and hem. Her hair was wrapped in a faded blue cloth, but the way she wore conveyed dignity rather than deprivation. She appeared no older than 25. Her features suggested mixed heritage, high cheekbones catching the morning light, amber eyes that seemed to hold unspoken depth, and skin the warm tone of honey in afternoon sun. A small silver locket hung at her throat, the only ornament she possessed, glinting softly as she breathed. She stood motionless near the fountain, hands clasped before her, eyes fixed on the cobblestones. There was a stillness about her that intrigued Henri, a sense of contained presence. She seemed accustomed to being observed, yet practiced at retreating inward, becoming invisible while remaining fully present. Henri approached slowly, examining her with the trained eye of someone raised to praise human property as casually as livestock. It was a skill he had never been comfortable with, even as a boy. He remembered his father teaching him how to judge health and value by inspecting teeth, hands, posture. The memory unsettled him now, though he could not fully explain why. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softer than intended. "Marguerite, sir." Her voice was quiet but steady, carrying an accent that suggested an education beyond what most enslaved people received. There was a faint French inflection to her speech, the kind shaped by New Orleans rather than the rural parishes. Marguerite, he repeated silently, testing the sound. It was a familiar French name, common enough in Louisiana. Yet the way she spoke it stirred something uncomfortable in his chest. A memory, perhaps, or the shadow of one, hovering just beyond conscious reach. "Look at me." She lifted her eyes slowly, and in that instant Henri felt the ground shift beneath him. Those eyes, that precise shade of amber flecked with green. He had seen them before. Every morning in his mirror, when the light struck his face just right. Every time he studied the portrait of his father hanging in the library, painted when Etienne Dufresne was still in his prime, before age and obligation carved lines into his features. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. The slight oval of her face, the strong jawline, firm without harshness, the way she tilted her head when listening, as though weighing every word before answering, even the faint crease between her brows when she concentrated. All of it echoed his own features with unsettling accuracy. His breath caught. Charles was speaking. Something about her qualifications, about the Natchez family who had previously owned her, about the excellent references she carried. But Henri barely heard him. His thoughts raced, forming connections he did not want to acknowledge, recognizing patterns he wished he could deny. "Where were you born?" he asked abruptly, the question sharper than he intended, cutting straight through Charles's practiced description of Marguerite's skills. "Household management. New Orleans, sir, on Rue Dauphine." Her voice remained steady, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or weariness. She had noticed his reaction. She had seen the shock on his face. Henry's hands went cold despite the mild morning air. His father had owned a townhouse on Rue Dauphine. He had kept it for decades, visiting often on business trips that sometimes stretched on for weeks. Henry's mother had never questioned those absences, or she had. She had done so privately, choosing the easier path of deliberate ignorance. Henri himself had visited that house once. He had been sent by his father to deliver legal papers to an attorney when he was about 15. He remembered little of the visit at the time. A courtyard filled with flowers, blue wallpaper patterned with birds, a woman answering the door, and a child peering out from behind her skirts. The memory now snapped into place with sudden, terrible clarity. The child had been 7 or 8 years old, with curious amber eyes that had studied him openly. He had looked at her for perhaps half a minute before the woman, her mother, he assumed, had gently pulled her back out of sight. He had thought nothing of it then. He had assumed she was the daughter of a servant or a tenant. He had looked at his sister and not known her. "Who was your mother?" His voice barely rose above a whisper. Margot hesitated, and for the first time something unmistakable passed through her eyes. Pain or the echo of it. "Her name was Celeste, sir. Celeste Dubois. She died when I was 12. The name meant nothing to Henri on its own, but the timing aligned with ruthless precision. He would have been 19 when Margot was born, away at university in New Orleans, absorbed in his studies and the social freedoms of a young man of his standing. His father would have been 53, still strong, still traveling regularly to the city on business, still maintaining whatever hidden life he had constructed away from Bellera, away from his wife and legitimate children. Charles was watching the exchange with growing confusion, his pleased expression giving way to concern. "Henri, is something wrong? If she isn't suitable, I can have her returned to the dealer. There's no obligation. I only thought." "No." The word came out sharper than intended. Henri cleared his throat and tried again, forcing control into his voice. "No, she's fine. Thank you, Charles. It's a generous gift. Very generous." But his mind was racing, scrambling for another explanation. Any explanation that would contradict what his eyes were telling him. Coincidence, perhaps. Louisiana was full of people with French features and light eyes. Maybe he was projecting meaning where there was none, driven by unease over the institution he had inherited along with his father's fortune, searching subconsciously for reasons to feel discomfort about a system that had enriched his family for generations. Yet even as he tried to reason away, He knew, deep in his bones, in that place where truth exists before language, before we can soften it into something survivable, he knew the woman standing before him, the human being his friend had just presented as property, tied up like a Christmas parcel, no different from furniture or livestock, was his sister, his half-sister. She had been born to an enslaved woman his father had kept as a mistress, raised in a house his father maintained for that purpose, educated with his father's money. And when that arrangement ended, for reasons he could only imagine, she had been sold into the system like any other commodity. Now she belonged to him. The law said she was his to command, to use, to dispose of as he saw fit. His sister was his slave. The realization made him physically ill. Charles continued speaking, explaining the arrangements he had made, the price he had paid, the documents that would need to be signed. Henri forced himself to listen, to respond at the right moments, to play the role of a grateful recipient accepting a thoughtful gift. He thanked Charles warmly, invited him to stay for Christmas dinner, and summoned one of the house servants to escort Margot to her quarters. As she followed the servant toward the house, Margot glanced back once. Their eyes met. In that brief exchange, Henri saw something that tightened his chest, a flash of recognition, of understanding, of shared knowledge neither of them could speak aloud. She knew, or at least suspected. She had seen the resemblance just as he had. She had drawn the same terrible conclusions. Now they were both trapped in a situation neither had chosen, bound by blood and law in a way that made any honest relationship impossible. Before we continue the story of Henri Dufresne and the sister he never knew he had, I want to hear from you. If you're enjoying this dark tale from Louisiana's past, please subscribe to Liturgy of Fear and hit the notification bell so you never miss our historical mysteries. And I'm curious, where are you listening from? Drop a comment below and tell me what state or city you're in. Now, let's return to Bel Air Plantation, where Henri is about to discover just how deep his father's secrets truly run. Henri did not sleep that night. Christmas dinner had been an ordeal. Charles and several guests from neighboring plantations filled the dining room with laughter and conversation, while Henri struggled to maintain the appearance of normalcy. Throughout the evening, he watched Margot move quietly through the room, directing the serving staff with calm efficiency. Every glimpse of her profile felt like a blade pressed against his chest. Around 3 a.m, unable to endure the darkness or his thoughts any longer, he rose from bed, dressed silently, and made his way to his father's study. If answers existed, they would be found there among the meticulously organized ledgers and correspondence that documented 3 decades of plantation management. The study was exactly as his father had left it. Henri had been unable to bring himself to change a single thing in the 6 months since Etienne's death. The massive desk still held his father's favorite pen, the one with a silver nib used to sign every important document. The walls were lined with books, legal volumes, agricultural manuals, histories of Louisiana and France. The air still carried the faint scent of his father's tobacco, a particular blend imported from Cuba. Henri lit the oil lamp on the desk and began his search. He started with the financial records, the leather-bound ledgers his father had kept with obsessive precision. Etienne Dufresne had believed deeply in documentation, in creating a paper trail that could withstand any scrutiny. Every expense was recorded, every transaction noted, every payment documented down to the smallest detail. Henri worked backward through the years, searching specifically for expenses connected to the Rue Dauphine property. He found them without difficulty. Monthly disbursements for upkeep, occasional larger payments for repairs or furnishings. The sums were significant but reasonable, exactly what one would expect for maintaining a townhouse in a fashionable district of New Orleans. But there were other entries as well. Regular payments sent to someone identified only by the initial CD. These transfers had continued for 25 years and stopped abruptly 8 months before his father's death. The amounts varied, sometimes $50, sometimes $100, occasionally more. But over the years they added up to a considerable fortune, more than enough to support a comfortable life in the city. 8 months. Margot had said her mother died when she was 12. If Margot was now 25, that meant Celeste had died 13 years earlier. The dates did not align, unless there was something else. Henri pulled another ledger from the shelf, this one containing copies of correspondence. His father had kept duplicates of important letters, organized by year with the same meticulous care he applied to every aspect of his life. Henri flipped to 1834, the year Margot would have been born, but found nothing remarkable. Then he turned to 1835. There, he discovered a letter from a New Orleans attorney confirming the purchase of a house on Rue Dauphine and the creation of a trust for its ongoing maintenance. The letter was formal and impersonal, strictly legal in tone, revealing nothing of the human story behind the transaction. But pinned to it was a small scrap of paper, folded over and over until it was no larger than a postage stamp. Henry's hands trembled as he unfolded it, smoothing the creases with care. The handwriting was feminine, graceful, educated, the penmanship of someone who had received years of instruction. It read, Etienne, she has your eyes. I have named her Margot after your mother. I ask nothing for myself, only that she be given a chance at something better than what I had. Let her learn to read. Let her know beauty. Let her believe, even for a little while, that the world can be kind. Henri sank back into his chair. The paper slipped from his fingers and landed softly on the desk. His grandmother's name had been Margot. He had never known her. She had died before he was born, but he had grown up hearing stories. She had been educated in France, cultured and refined, a woman who had insisted on bringing French tutors to the plantation for her sons. His father had spoken of her with reverence. He had kept her portrait in his bedroom until the day he died, and he had named his daughter by an enslaved woman after her. The cruelty of it struck Henri like a physical blow. His father had acknowledged his child enough to give her his mother's name. He had paid for her education. He had provided her mother with a house and financial support, yet he had never freed them. He had never legitimized Margot's existence. He had kept her hidden, a secret managed with money and distance, a problem to be contained rather than confronted. Henri continued searching as the night wore on, uncovering more fragments of the truth. There were receipts for piano lessons dated from when Margot would have been 6, bills for books, not just basic primers, but literature, poetry, philosophy, payments to a dressmaker for clothing suitable for a young lady of society, not an enslaved child. His father had given Margot an education that would have been extraordinary for any woman of that era, enslaved or free. And still, he had never freed her. That was the detail Henri could not reconcile, the thought that gnawed at him as the oil in the lamp burned low. His father had possessed the power to grant freedom with a single legal document. Louisiana law made manumission complicated, but not impossible. He could have done it. He had chosen not to. The reason, Henri realized with growing bitterness, was likely mundane. Freedom would have required acknowledgement. It would have raised questions about who Margot was, about who her father was. It would have threatened the carefully constructed social standing Etienne Dufresne had spent his life protecting. Better to keep them comfortable, but controlled. Provided for, yet powerless. Better to maintain the fiction that they were merely property treated generously, rather than family he was too cowardly to claim. As dawn broke over Bellara, the sky washed in soft pinks and golds, Henri found one final document. It was tucked into the back of a ledger from 1846, the year before his father's death. A letter from the same New Orleans lawyer informed Etienne that Celeste Du Bois had passed away and requested instructions regarding the disposition of her property and the future of her daughter. Clipped to it was his father's response. Continue the trust for the property. Make no changes regarding the girl. She is to remain as she is until further notice. E.D. She is to remain as she is. Not free her, not secure her future, not place her somewhere safe. Simply leave her as she was, enslaved, vulnerable, subject to whatever fate awaited her once the trust ended or circumstances shifted. And circumstances had shifted. The trust had apparently dissolved with his father's death. Margot had been sold to settle an account. transferred to the hands of strangers, inspected and priced like livestock, and finally purchased as a Christmas gift for her own half-brother. Henri thought his father's funeral, the elaborate service at the parish's Catholic church, the governor in attendance, the bishop delivering the eulogy, praising Etienne Dufresne's character, his generosity, his contributions to Louisiana society, a pillar of the community, a man of honor and principle. What would they say if they knew about the woman on Rue Dauphine, about the daughter he had kept as property, about the son who now legally owned his own sister? The sound of the household stirring pulled Henri from his thoughts. He heard the kitchen staff beginning their morning work, the clatter of pots, the low murmur of voices. Somewhere in that quiet activity was Margot, moving through another day of a life shaped by secrets that had now come to rest in his hands. Margot, beginning her first full day at Bellera, unaware that the man who now owned her was her brother. Or was she unaware? That question had gnawed at Henri throughout the night. Had Celeste told her daughter the truth about her father, or had she kept that secret, shielding Margot from the pain of knowing she was bound by blood to a man who would never acknowledge her? Henri needed to know, but he could not ask directly. The question itself would reveal too much. It would expose his own knowledge and create a situation neither of them could navigate without danger. He would have to be careful, strategic. He would have to find the truth without revealing his own. The morning after Christmas dawned gray and cold. Fog rolled in from the river and settled over Bellera like a burial shroud. Henri emerged from the study exhausted, his eyes burning from sleeplessness and hours spent reading by lamplight. He had uncovered so much, yet the most important answer remained out of reach. Did Margot know who her father was? Had she recognized the same truth he had when their eyes met in the courtyard? He found her in the main house, in the morning room overlooking the gardens. She was directing two other enslaved women as they arranged furniture and cleaned the windows. She moved with quiet authority, her instructions clear and calm. The other women responded to her with an ease that suggested she had already established her place within the household hierarchy, despite having arrived only the day before. Margot, Henri said from the doorway. She turned at once, her expression carefully composed. Yes, sir. I'd like to speak with you. In the library. He caught a flicker of apprehension in her eyes before it vanished. She followed him down the hall, keeping the proper distance. 3 steps behind, never beside him. Her footsteps were nearly silent on the polished wood floors. It was a discipline learned long ago, the choreography of survival that kept enslaved people safe by making them unobtrusive. The library was Henri's favorite room in the house. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, filled with books his father had collected over the years. Many had likely never been opened, purchased for display rather than understanding. But Henri had always loved the room. The scent of leather and paper, the light filtering through tall windows, the feeling of being surrounded by knowledge and possibility. As a child, it had been his refuge when the brutal realities of plantation life became unbearable. Now it felt like a confessional. Close the door, Henri said. She hesitated before complying. He knew exactly how this must appear. A master calling a female slave into a private room, ordering the door shut. The implications were obvious and sickening. He needed to make it clear, quickly, that this was not that kind of conversation. You said you can read, Henri began, gesturing toward the shelves. Yes, sir. That's unusual. How did you learn? My mother arranged for lessons when I was young. She believed education was important. Margot's voice was steady, but Henri could hear the restraint beneath it, the careful selection of each word. Your mother must have been remarkable. Something shifted in her expression, a softening around the eyes as genuine feeling slipped past her control. She was, sir, the most remarkable person I've ever known. She died believing I would have a better life than she did. The words lingered between them, heavy with unspoken irony. Celeste had died believing her daughter would be protected, educated, prepared to move through the world with dignity. Instead, Margot had been sold. She had become property. She had been brought into the household of her own brother. "And your father?" Henri asked, forcing his tone into something casual. "Did you know him?" The question was too personal, too direct, but he could not stop himself. Margot's face closed instantly, her expression smoothing into careful neutrality. "No, sir. My mother never spoke of him." It could have been the truth, or it could have been the answer she had learned to give, the safest response, protecting both herself and her mother's memory. Henri could not tell. He studied her face, searching for some sign, some crack in the mask, but she had learned too well how to hide herself, how to reveal only what was safe. "I see." Henri turned to the window, looking out over the plantation. The sugarcane fields stretched to the horizon, brown and lifeless in the winter cold. In a few months, they would turn green again, growing toward the brutal harvest season that consumed every waking hour from August through December. The cycle never changed. Year after year, generation after generation. "You'll work in the main house," he said at last, still facing the fields. "Household management, as Charles mentioned. You'll report directly to me, not the overseer. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir. You'll have your own room in the house, not in the quarters. You'll take your meals in the kitchen with the other house staff. You will be treated with respect." He turned back to her, meeting her eyes fully. "And if anyone at all, treats you otherwise, you'll tell me immediately. Do you understand?" Margot's eyes widened slightly. This was not the speech of a typical master addressing a newly acquired slave. Henri could see her trying to interpret it, trying to understand what he wanted, what this meant, whether this kindness was genuine or something more dangerous. "Thank you, sir," she said carefully, revealing nothing. "That's all. You may go." She left quickly, and Henri sank into his father's chair. His chair now, the weight of his inheritance pressed down on him like a physical force. He owned his sister. The law declared her his property, to sell, to punish, to use in any way he chose. No one would question his right to do so. The thought made him nauseous. He spent the rest of the morning in the library, attempting to focus on plantation accounts that demanded his attention. But his thoughts returned again and again to Margot, to the impossible situation his father had created. What was he supposed to do? He could not simply free her, not immediately. Manumission was complicated, requiring approval from the parish court and the posting of a bond to ensure that the freed person would not become a public burden. Any sudden act of emancipation would raise questions and invite scrutiny into the reasons behind it. And what would he tell people? That he had discovered she was his sister? That would require explaining how he knew, which would mean exposing his father's secret, and that revelation would destroy the Dufresne family's reputation. The scandal would be enormous. He would be ostracized from Louisiana society. His business relationships would collapse, and Bella itself might be placed at risk. And yet, keeping her enslaved was unconscionable. Every moment Margot remained his property was a moral outrage, a continuation of the injustice his father had committed. Henri was trapped between two impossible choices, with no clear path forward. The weeks after Christmas passed in a strange, fragile equilibrium. Margot proved to be exactly what Charles had promised. Efficient, intelligent, and fully capable of managing the household with a competence that impressed even longtime staff who had served the Dufresne family for decades. She moved through Bellera like a ghost, present without intruding, anticipating needs before they were spoken, handling the complex logistics of a large plantation household with effortless precision. Henri watched her constantly, searching for any sign that she knew the truth. At times, he caught her standing before his father's portrait in the library, her expression unreadable. The painting depicted Etienne Dufresne in his prime, perhaps 40 years old, formally dressed with one hand resting on a globe, a symbol of his worldly success and cultivated image. The artist had captured something unsettling in his eyes, an intensity Henri had never been able to fully name. One afternoon, Henri found Margot alone in the music room, standing before the grand piano that had once belonged to his mother. Her fingers hovered just above the keys without touching them, as though she were recalling something from long ago, or restraining herself from doing something she longed to do. "Do you play?" Henri asked from the doorway. She startled as if burned, her hands dropping instantly to her sides. "I did, sir. Once. My mother arranged lessons when I was young." "Play something," Henri said. "Now." She hesitated. "Sir, I don't think that would be appropriate. I haven't played in years." "That wasn't a request, Margot." His voice came out firmer than he intended, but he needed to know. Music was one of the few things capable of bypassing the careful masks people wore, revealing what lay beneath. Slowly, she sat at the piano, her posture rigid with tension. Her hands settled on the keys, and after a brief pause, she began to play. The piece was Chopin, a nocturne performed with a technical mastery that spoke of years of serious training. But it was the emotion in her playing that struck Henri most deeply. A profound, aching sadness that poured from her fingers and filled the room with a grief so intense it was almost unbearable. Each note was precise and controlled, yet together they conveyed an overwhelming depth of feeling. Henri found himself holding his breath, transfixed by the beauty and sorrow woven into the music. This was not the playing of someone who had learned piano as a polite accomplishment. This was the playing of someone who had poured her soul into the instrument, who had found in music a refuge from a world that offered few other mercies. When she finished, the silence fell heavy, pressing down on the room. Henri realized his hands were clenched at his sides, his jaw tight. He forced himself to relax, to breathe. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked, his voice rough despite his effort to steady it. "At my mother's house, sir. We had a piano. She said music was important, that it could take you places you couldn't go otherwise." Margot's voice sounded distant, almost dreamlike, as though she were speaking from another time. "She used to sit with me while I practiced for hours. She said that no matter what happened, no matter where I ended up, the music would always belong to me. No one could take it from me." "Your mother's house," Henri repeated quietly, his throat tightening. "En Rue Dauphine." Margot's hands still on the keys. "Yes, sir." "Tell me about it," he said. "The house." She was silent for a long moment, and Henri thought she might refuse. Then she spoke, her voice soft and distant. "It was small but beautiful. There were flowers in the courtyard, jasmine and roses. My mother tended them herself, pruning them carefully, talking to them as she worked. She said plants could feel love, that they grew better when you cared for them properly. The parlor had blue wallpaper with silver birds. I used to count them when I was supposed to be practicing piano. There were 47 birds on that wall. I counted them hundreds of times. It was always 47. Henri felt his throat constrict. He had been to that house once, years earlier, sent by his father to deliver documents to the lawyer who managed the property. He had been about 15, too young to understand what he was seeing, too naive to question why his father maintained a separate residence in the city. He remembered the courtyard, the flowers, the blue wallpaper with silver birds. He remembered a woman answering the door, Celeste, though he hadn't known her name then, and a girl of 7 or 8 peeking from behind her skirts, watching him with curious amber eyes. He had looked at his sister and not known her. They had stood in the same room, breathed the same air, and he had seen nothing more than a child who meant nothing to him. "What happened to the house?" he asked, though he already knew the answer from the documents. "It was sold after my mother died. The lawyer said the arrangement had ended, that there was no provision for me to remain there. I was sent to work for a family in the Garden District. They were kind, as far as such things go. The mistress taught me fine needlework, and I was allowed to continue reading in my spare time. But when they fell on hard times 3 years later, they sold me to settle debts." She spoke calmly, as if describing the weather rather than the dismantling of her entire life. "I've learned that nothing is permanent, sir. Not houses, not arrangements, not kindness. Everything can be taken away. The The resignation in her voice cut deeper than anger ever could have. She had learned to expect nothing, to hope for nothing, to accept whatever fate was placed before her with quiet dignity. Henri recognized it as a survival strategy, a way of protecting herself from the constant disappointment of being treated as property in a world that refused to see her as fully human. "You can play whenever you like," he said suddenly. "The piano is here. It sits unused. My mother played before she died. My father kept it maintained, but he never touched it himself. It should be played. Music shouldn't be silent." She looked up at him, surprise breaking through the careful mask she wore. "Sir, the piano," he repeated, cutting her off gently. "Use it. Play. Whenever you have time. Consider it part of your duties, if that makes it easier. Instruments need to be played regularly to stay in good condition." "Thank you, sir," she said quietly. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but Henri heard the emotion beneath it. Gratitude, yes, but also confusion and weariness. She was trying to understand why he was showing her kindness, what he expected in return. Henri left the room quickly, before he could say something reckless, before he could speak the truth that burned his chest like acid. He could not free her, not yet. The legal process was too complex, and any sudden manumission would raise questions he was not prepared to answer. But he could offer small dignities, small freedoms within the prison of her circumstances. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was all he could give without destroying everything. Just when it seemed the full extent of the Dufresne family's secrets had been uncovered, the situation at Bellera grew even more complicated. Spring arrived with its usual explosion of growth and relentless activity. The sugarcane fields turned green almost overnight. The air thickened with humidity until every breath felt like swallowing water, and the pace of plantation life intensified. Henri threw himself into management with almost desperate focus, tried to lose himself in the endless details of running a massive agricultural operation. He met daily with the overseers, reviewed work schedules, and pushed for treatment of the enslaved workers that was as humane as the brutal system would allow. He inspected the fields, the equipment, the sugar mill that would thunder to life during harvest. He reviewed accounts, negotiated with buyers in New Orleans, and dealt with the constant stream of small crises that arose on an estate the size of Bellera. Yet no matter how busy he made himself, he could not escape the central problem of his life. Margot was everywhere, managing the household, overseeing the kitchen, ensuring that everything functioned smoothly. Every time he saw her, every time he heard her voice or caught a glimpse of her profile, he was reminded of the impossible situation his father had left behind. The house servants accepted her authority quickly. She gave instructions firmly but without cruelty, and she never asked anyone to do work she was unwilling to do herself. Henri often saw her alongside the other women, sleeves rolled up as she helped with laundry or cooking. The field workers, however, were more wary. They saw her as someone elevated above them, granted privileges they would never know. Henri heard the whispers, noticed the looks that followed her when she passed. There was resentment there, and he understood it. In a system where everyone was oppressed, even the smallest advantage gained by one person was seen as coming at the expense of another. In April, a letter arrived that changed everything. It came from New Orleans, from the law office of Bogard and Associates. Henri opened in his study, expecting a routine matter of business, a contract to review, a payment to authorize, some minor legal issue requiring his attention. Instead, he found himself reading words that made his blood run cold. "Dear Mr. Dufresne," the letter began, written in the formal, elaborate style favored by attorneys. "It is my duty to inform you of a matter concerning your late father's estate that has recently come to light. Among the papers of my late partner, Mr. Alphonse Bogard, who passed away last month, we discovered a sealed document dated 1834, with instructions that it be delivered to Etienne Dufresne's heir upon certain conditions being met. Those conditions have now been satisfied, and I am obligated by the terms of my late partner's agreement to forward this document to you. Please find it enclosed. Should you have any questions, I remain at your service. Respectfully, Jean-Baptiste Moreau, attorney at law. Attached to the letter was a smaller envelope, yellow with age and sealed with red wax bearing his father's signet ring. The seal was unbroken, suggesting no one had read its contents since Etienne had written it 13 years earlier. Henry's hands trembled as he broke the seal and unfolded the paper inside. His father's handwriting stared back at him, strong and deliberate despite the years. The ink had faded from black to brown, but the words were unmistakably clear. Henri, the letter began, and the use of his name rather than a formal address made his stomach tighten. His father had rarely addressed him so directly in writing, preferring distance and formality. The intimacy of it suggested something deeply personal, something his father had struggled to say. If you are reading this, then I am dead, and certain events have occurred that I prayed would never come to pass. I am a coward for not telling you this in life, but I cannot face my grave without ensuring that you know the truth, even if I lack the courage to speak it aloud. In 1833, I met a woman named Celeste Dubois. She was enslaved, owned by a merchant settling his affairs before returning to France. I told myself that I purchased her freedom. In truth, I purchased her, and in doing so, I bound her me as surely as any chain. She was educated, cultured, more refined than many white women of my acquaintance. She spoke French like a native Parisian, played the piano beautifully, and had read more books than most men I knew. I told myself that I loved her. Perhaps I did in my own way, but I loved my position more. I loved the respect of my peers, the security of my social standing, the comfort of my life at Bellera. I loved what I had more than I loved her. When she told me she was carrying my child, I made a choice. I could have freed them both. I could have acknowledged my daughter, faced a scandal, and lived with the consequences. Instead, I established a house on Rue Dauphine. I provided for them financially. I visited when I could, which was not often enough. I convinced myself this was sufficient, that it was a form of love, that I was doing the best I could under difficult circumstances. It was not love. It was cowardice dressed as practicality. It was selfishness disguised as responsibility. Margot, my daughter, your sister, grew up knowing she had a father who would never claim her. Celeste never told her my name, but she knew I existed. She knew I chose my legitimate family over her. I saw that knowledge in her eyes as she grew older, the understanding that she was a secret to be hidden, a complication to be managed. I saw it, and I did nothing to change it. I am telling you this now because I fear what may happen after my death. The trust one established will end with Celeste's passing. I made no provisions beyond that because to do so would have required explanations I was not prepared to give. If Margot has been sold, if she has entered the system I profited from all my life, then you must find her. You must free her. You must give her the life I was too weak to provide. This is not a request. Henri, this is a command from your father and a plea from a man who knows he has failed in the most fundamental way a human being can fail. Make this right. Do what I could not. Be the man I should have been. I left instructions with Bogard to deliver this letter to you only if two conditions were met. First, that I was dead. And second, that Celeste had also passed away. If you are reading this, both conditions have been satisfied, and Margot is alone in the world, vulnerable to whatever fate may befall her. Find her, free her, give her the family she should have had from beginning. Your father, Etienne Dufresne. Henri read the letter 3 times, each reading bringing fresh waves of anger, grief, disgust, and a crushing sense of responsibility. His father had known. He had known exactly what might happen, and he had done nothing to prevent it. He had written this letter 13 years ago, when Margot was 12, and then lived another 13 years without acting on it. 13 years in which he could have freed her himself, could have faced the consequences of his choices, could have done what was right. Instead, he had died and left his son to inherit not only his wealth and land, but his sins. The worst part was the timing. The letter had been written when Margot was 12. Etienne Dufresne had lived another 13 years after that, years in which he continued the arrangement. continued the payments, continued visiting the house on Rue Dauphine whenever business brought him to New Orleans. Then he died, leaving Henri to confront the wreckage. Henri rose and walked to the window. The letter crumpled in his fist. Outside, the plantation pulsed with activity. Enslaved workers moved through the fields, tending the young cane plants. The overseer rode among them on horseback, watching, supervising, prepared to enforce discipline at the slightest hesitation. It was a scene Henri had witnessed thousands of times, so familiar it had become invisible. Now he saw it differently. Every person in those fields was someone's son or daughter, someone's brother or sister. Each carried a history, a family, a life fractured by the system that had enriched families like the Dufresnes. And Henri was part of that system. He benefited from it. He sustained it every day he remained at Bellera. The realization made him nauseous. He returned to the desk and smoothed the letter flat, reading it once more. His father's words seemed to accuse him from the page. Make this right. Do what I could not. But how? How was he meant to correct something so fundamentally wrong? How could he give Margot the family she should have had when that family's wealth was built on slavery? When the very resources that could secure her future came from the suffering of people just like her? There were no good answers. Only choices, each carrying its own burden. Henri spent 3 days wrestling with the decision. He could free Margot immediately, but that would demand explanations he was not prepared to give. He could send her away with money and papers, but that felt like another abandonment, another man in her life choosing convenience over courage. He could tell her the truth, but what comfort would that bring? What solace was there in knowing her brother owned her, that the family denied to her had become her jailer? In the end, the choice was taken from him. He was in the library late one evening, his father's letter spread open on the desk, when he heard a soft knock at the door. Before he could answer, Margot entered, carrying a tray with coffee and brandy. It had become her habit to bring him refreshments in the evening, a small service she performed without being asked. She set the tray on a side table and turned to leave. "Wait," Henri said. She stopped, her hand resting on the door handle. "Close the door." She did, her expression cautious. Henri was painfully aware of how this must appear. The master summoning a female slave to his private room late at night, ordering the door shut. The implications were obvious and repellent. He had to speak quickly, before misunderstanding could take root. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice urgent. "And I need you to listen without interrupting. Can you do that?" Margot stood perfectly still, hands clasped before her, her face carefully blank. Henri recognized the posture now. It was armor, a defense she had learned long ago. When masters asked for attention, it was rarely to give something freely. Talk privately, it rarely meant anything good. "I know who your father was," Henri began, and saw her flinch as if struck. "I know about the house on Rue Dauphine, about your mother, about the arrangement my father made. I know because I found his records. I found his letter." He slid the yellowed paper across the desk toward her. "Read it." Margot didn't move. "Sir, I don't think." "Read it," he said, his voice harsher than he intended, roughened by 3 days of sleeplessness and emotional strain. "Please, I need you to read it." She approached the desk slowly, as if stepping toward something dangerous. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the letter. Henri watched her face as she read, saw the exact moment when understanding settled in, when the full weight of the truth struck her. Her fingers tightened, crumpling the edges of the paper. Her breathing grew shallow and quick. A single tear escaped and slid down her cheek before she could stop it. When she finished, she set the letter down carefully, smoothing the creases she had made. She looked at Henri with eyes that held a lifetime of pain, unanswered questions, and grief with nowhere to go. "You're my brother." Her voice was flat, stripped of emotion, as if she were stating a simple fact rather than acknowledging a truth that shattered everything. "Yes, and you've known since Christmas." "Yes." She laughed then, a sound without humor, brittle and broken. It carried all the pain she had learned to bury, all the anger and betrayal she had been forced to swallow to survive. Of course you knew. You looked at me and saw it, just as I looked at you and saw my own face staring back. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was inventing connections because I wanted them to exist. I told myself it was impossible, that fate couldn't be that cruel. But you knew. I didn't know what to do, Henri said helplessly. I still don't. You could free me. The words were simple, direct, devastating. I will. I am. The papers are already being prepared. But Margot, he stopped, realized it was the first time he had said her name without the barrier of formality. I don't want you to just disappear. I don't want to be another man in your life who abandons you. What do you want, then? Her voice sharpened, anger breaking through her control. Do you want me to be grateful? Do you want me to forgive our father for keeping my mother as property? For keeping me as property? For choosing his comfort over our freedom? Do you want me to thank you for doing what should have been done the day I was born? What exactly do you want from me, Henri? Hearing his name from her lips struck him like a blow. They were siblings by blood and strangers by circumstance. Worse than strangers, they were master and slave, owner and property, divided by a chasm that felt impossible to cross. I want. Henri struggled to find words for something he barely understood himself. I want to know you. I want to understand who you are, what you want, what your life could be if you were free to choose it. I want to be your brother, not your master. I want the relationship we should have had from the beginning. You can't be both, Margot said quietly, her anger dissolving into something heavier, more resigned. As long as I'm enslaved, as long as I'm property, you can only be my master. That's how this system works. That's what our father understood, even if he pretended otherwise. You can't own someone and love them. You can't hold someone in bondage and call it family. She was right, and Henri knew it. There was no middle ground, no honest way forward while that inequality remained. He had been searching for a compromise, for a way to quiet his conscience without fully facing the horror of what he had inherited. The papers will be ready in 2 weeks, he said, his voice thick. I'm freeing you completely, with enough money to establish yourself wherever you choose. New Orleans, if you want to return there, or somewhere else. The North, perhaps, where you'll be safer. The choice will be yours. And then what? Margot asked, searching his face. Do we pretend to be strangers? Do we acknowledge the connection? What does it mean to be siblings when we've lived our entire lives in different worlds? When one of us owned the other, even if only for a few months? Henri had no answer. The question reached far beyond them, into a system designed to make such bonds impossible, to divide people by birth and skin and power. I don't know, he admitted, but I think we have to try to figure it out. We owe that much to ourselves. And to your mother. She wanted better for you. She died believing you'd have a chance at something more. Maybe we can honor that, even if we can't fix everything else. Margot's expression softened slightly at the mention of Celeste. She never spoke badly of him. She said quietly, "Our father." She never told me his name, but she never said a cruel word about him either. I think she loved him, in spite of everything. Or maybe because of everything. I never understood it. How could she love someone who kept her enslaved? How could she forgive someone who chose his reputation over her freedom? Love is complicated, Henri said softly, especially when it exists inside systems designed to destroy it. Maybe she didn't forgive him. Maybe she just understood that he was weak, and she refused to let his weakness define her. Margot moved to the window, looking out over the darkened grounds. Moonlight spilled across the fields and the quarters where the enslaved workers slept. I used to imagine what it would be like to have a family, she said. A real one. Not just my mother and me in that little house, but brothers and sisters. A father who acknowledged me. A place where I belonged. I used to make up stories about them, about what we would do together. She turned back to him, tears shining on her cheeks in the pale light. And now I find out I have a brother, and he's the man who owns me. None of the stories I told myself as a child ever imagined that. The pain in her voice was unbearable. Henri wanted to reach for her, to comfort her, to somehow make it better. But he knew there were some wounds no gesture could undo. Knew there was nothing he could say that would undo the fundamental wrongness of their situation. They were both victims of their father's choices, trapped inside a system neither of them had created. Yet both were forced to navigate. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, knowing the words were painfully insufficient. "I'm sorry for all of it, for our father's choices, for the system that made those choices possible, for the fact that we're meeting like this instead of how we should have met, as family, as equals, as people free to choose what kind of relationship we wanted." "Sorry doesn't change anything," Margot replied, though her voice was softer now, less sharp with anger. "But I suppose the start. It's more than our father ever gave my mother, more than most people in my position ever receive." They stood in silence for a long moment, two people bound by blood, yet separated by everything else, trying to imagine a path forward through something that felt impossible. 2 weeks, Henri said at last. "In 2 weeks you'll be free, and then we'll figure out what comes next. Together." Margot nodded slowly. "Together," she repeated, as if testing the weight of the word. "I've never had a brother before. I don't know how to do this." "Neither do I," Henri admitted. "But we'll learn. We have to." The 2 weeks before Margot's manumission papers were finalized passed in a strange limbo. She continued managing the household, but the dynamic between her and Henri had shifted irrevocably. They were no longer master and slave, yet not quite siblings either. They existed in an undefined space, learning to navigate a relationship with no precedent and no social script. Henri found himself seeking her counsel, asking her opinions on household matters he had once handled alone. He discovered she had insights into plantation operations he had never considered, ways to organize work more efficiently, ways to treat the enslaved laborers with greater humanity, without sacrificing productivity. She had spent her life observing systems from the inside, understanding them from the perspective of someone with no power. That perspective proved invaluable in ways Henri was only beginning to grasp. Margot, in turn, seemed to relax gradually, allowing brief glimpses of the person she might have been had she grown up free. She was perceptive, intelligent, and possessed a dry, understated humor that often caught Henri off guard. Once, when he complained about a particularly frustrating business negotiation, she remarked calmly, "Perhaps if you stopped trying to be reasonable and simply told them what you wanted, they'd respect you more. Reasonable people are easy to manipulate." Henri laughed despite himself, startled by her bluntness. "Is that what you think of me, that I'm too reasonable? I think you're trying to be a good person in a system that punishes goodness," she replied. "It's admirable, but it's also exhausting to watch." The comment stung, but he recognized the truth in it. He was trying to be humane inside an inhumane structure, searching for moral footing where none truly existed. Margot saw through that struggle with the clarity of someone who no longer harbored illusions. One evening, they sat together in the library, a breach of protocol that would have scandalized anyone who witnessed it, and spoke about their childhoods. Henri described growing up at Bellera, the constant pressure of being the younger son, living in his brother Philippe's shadow until death made him the heir. He spoke of his education in New Orleans, the law practice he had begun building before his father's death summoned him back to the plantation. Margot spoke of the house on Rue Dauphine, of the careful balance her mother maintained between dignity and survival. She described the education that had set her apart from other enslaved people and yet made her isolation more acute. "I could read Shakespeare," she said quietly, "but I couldn't walk down the street without papers proving I had permission to exist there. I could play Chopin, but I couldn't choose where I lived or who I associated with. The education my mother fought to give me only made me more aware of everything I was denied. Sometimes I wondered if ignorance would have been easier. Do you resent her for it?" Henri asked gently. "For teaching you to want things you couldn't have?" Margot considered the question carefully, her gaze distant. No, I think she was trying to give me tools to survive, to maybe reach something better. She couldn't free me herself. She had no money, no power, no legal standing. But she could give me knowledge, skills, the ability to move between worlds. She did the best she could with what she had. I can't resent her for that. Like our father, Henri said bitterly, doing the best he could, which wasn't nearly enough. No, Margot agreed. It wasn't enough. But most people don't do enough. Most choose comfort over justice, convenience over courage. Our father wasn't unique. He was human. Weak, selfish, cowardly, but human. The generosity of her perspective shamed Henri. She had every reason to hate their father and the system that had crushed her, yet she had found a way to acknowledge the humanity even of those who denied hers. "You're remarkable," he said quietly. Margot smiled, a real smile that softened her face and made her seem younger, less burdened. "I'm a survivor," she replied. "That's different. Remarkable is a luxury I never had. I just learned to adapt, to preserve myself in situations designed to destroy me." On the day the papers were finalized, Henri summoned Margot to his study. The documents lay neatly arranged on his desk. Legal proof of her freedom, signed, sealed, ready to be entered into the parish records. Beside them sat a bank draft for $5,000, enough to allow her real independence and genuine choice about her future. It was a substantial sum, more than most free people of color could hope to amass in a lifetime. "It's done," he said, sliding the papers toward her. "You're free." Margot picked them up with hands that trembled despite her effort to remain composed. She read every line carefully, every clause, as if expecting a hidden condition, some trap that would make the freedom temporary or conditional. When she finished, she set the papers down and looked at Henri with an expression he could not fully read. Relief, certainly, but also something heavier beneath it. Grief, perhaps, or the weight of everything that freedom could never give back. Weight of possibility. "Thank you," she said simply. "Where will you go?" Henri asked, though he dreaded the answer. He had grown accustomed to her presence, to the strange, fragile comfort of having family nearby. Even under such painful circumstances, the thought of her leaving, of never seeing her again, filled him with an unexpected sense of loss. "I don't know yet," Margot said. "I need time to think, to figure out who I am when I'm not defined by my relationship to other people. I've been someone's daughter, someone's property, someone's responsibility my entire life. I want to discover who I am when I'm just myself, when I'm not performing a role to survive." Henri nodded, understanding even as his heart sank. "Will you stay in Louisiana?" "Maybe, maybe not. That's the beauty of freedom, isn't it? I get to choose. I decide where I go, what I do, who I become. It's terrifying and exhilarating at the same time." She gathered the papers carefully, holding them as though they were the most precious objects she had ever owned. At the door, she paused and turned back. "Henri," she said, using his name without the formal distance of first time, and the sound it felt like a gift. "Thank you for doing what our father couldn't. It doesn't erase the past, but it matters. It matters that you tried. It matters that you saw me as a person, not property. It matters that you're trying to be better than the system you inherited." After she left, Henri remained alone in the study for a long time, feeling the full weight of what had just occurred. He had freed his sister. He had fulfilled his father's final command. He had done what he believed was right by every moral measure he possessed. And yet, he felt as though he had lost something irreplaceable. He realized that what he had lost was the possibility of a normal sibling relationship, the chance to know Margot as brothers and sisters were meant to know one another. Their bond would always be marked by the circumstances of their meeting, by the fact that he had owned her, even if only briefly. That stain would never completely fade. Perhaps that was as it should be. Perhaps they needed to carry that weight, to remember what had been done to them and to countless others. Perhaps the discomfort was necessary, a reminder of the true cost of the world they had been born into. Margot left Bellara 3 days later, on a morning when fog rolled in from the river and turned the world gray and indistinct. Henri watched from a gallery as she climbed into the carriage that would take her to New Orleans, her few possessions packed into a single trunk. She had refused his offer of more clothing, more luggage, more of anything. "I want to start fresh," she had said. "I want to choose everything myself, from my clothes to my furniture to the books on my shelves. I want everything in my life to be mine." She looked up at him just before the driver set off, raised one hand in farewell, and then she was gone, disappearing into mist like a ghost, like something that had never quite been real. The household felt emptier without her. The staff continued their work efficiently. Margot had trained them well in the short time she had been at Bellara, but something vital had vanished. Henri realized that what Margot had brought to Plantation had nothing to do with skill or organization. She had brought the possibility of redemption, the fragile hope that the sins of the past might somehow be confronted, if not fully atoned for. Now she was gone, and Henri was left alone with his inheritance and his guilt. He buried himself in the work of the plantation, but his heart was no longer in it. He looked at the enslaved people laboring in his fields and saw Margot in every face. He heard their voices and wondered what stories they carried, what families had been torn apart, what potential had been crushed beneath the system he continued to uphold simply by maintaining Bellara and accepting the wealth drawn from their labor. For the first time in his life, Henri truly understood what his prosperity rested upon. It was not merely sugar, land, or favorable markets. It was human suffering multiplied across generations, legalized, normalized, and defended by those who profited from it. His father had been one of those men. His grandfather had been one of those men. And now Henri was as well, no matter how desperately he tried to be different, to be better. The realization was crushing. He began to make changes at Bellara, small at first, then increasingly significant. He reduced work quotas, accepting lower profits in exchange for less brutal conditions. He ensured families were kept together, refusing to sell anyone regardless of financial pressure. He established a school where enslaved children could learn to read and write, hiring a free woman of color from New Orleans to teach them. His neighbors noticed. They made comments about his softness, his impracticality, his dangerous ideas. Charles Beaumont, the man who had once given him Margot as a Christmas gift, confronted him one evening over brandy. "You're being foolish, Henri," Charles said bluntly, his face flushed with drink and irritation. "Treating them like people will only make them dissatisfied. You're creating problems for yourself and for the rest of us. If your slaves start expecting humane treatment, ours will too. You're undermining the entire system." "They are people, Charles," Henri replied quietly. "That isn't an opinion. It's a fact." "Of course they're people," Charles snapped, "but they're also property. That's the law. That's how the world works. You can't change it by being soft." "The world changes," Henri said steadily, meeting his friend's eyes. "Laws change. What seems permanent in one generation becomes unthinkable in the next. Slavery won't last forever. It can't." Charles shook his head, setting his glass down with unnecessary force. "You've become strange since your father died. I don't know what's gotten into you, but I hope you come to your senses before you ruin yourself. You're making enemies. People are talking. They're saying you're an abolitionist sympathizer, that you're dangerous." "Let them talk," Henri replied, though the warning sent a chill through him. In Louisiana in 1847, such labels could be deadly, but he could not return to ignorance. He could not unsee what he'd seen or unknow what he now understood. Henri never told Charles about Margot. He never explained that his sister had been enslaved, that he had owned her, that the moral questions were no longer abstract but deeply personal, written into his blood. Questions Charles dismissed so casually had become painfully real for Henri. Some truths were too dangerous to share, too likely to shatter the fragile social position he was trying to maintain, even as he worked, carefully, quietly, to undermine the very system that sustained it. In June, a letter arrived from New Orleans. Henri recognized Margot's handwriting instantly and tore it open with trembling hands. "Dear Henri," it began, and the simple intimacy of the greeting tightened his throat. She wrote that she was well and settling into her new life. She had taken rooms in the French Quarter, in a boarding house run by a free woman of color who had shown her great kindness. The freedom to make choices, she said, still felt strange. At times, she found herself waiting for permission to do things she now had every right to do. But she was learning. She was becoming someone new, or perhaps becoming who she had always been beneath the roles she had been forced to play in order to survive. She had been thinking often about their father, about the choices he made and the legacy he left behind. She admitted that she could not bring herself to hate him, though perhaps she should. He had been a man trapped in a corrupting system and had lacked the courage to resist it. That made him weak, she wrote, but not monstrous. Most people were weak when tested. Most chose comfort over principle. But Henri had been given a choice, and he had chosen what was difficult and right. He could have kept her enslaved, preserved the secret, protected himself and his position. Instead, he had acted. That mattered. It did not repair everything, but it mattered. She did not know what their relationship would become. They were siblings, but also strangers shaped by vastly different lives. Perhaps they would one day truly know one another, or perhaps they would remain distant, connected by blood yet separated by history. Either way, she wanted him to know that she did not blame him for the circumstances of her birth or for the years she had spent in bondage. He had inherited a terrible situation and had handled it with more grace than she had ever expected. She thanked him for her freedom, for seeing her as a person rather than property, and for being the brother their father had never allowed himself to be. Henri read the letter again and again, each reading bringing a complicated mix of relief and sorrow. Margot was safe. She was free. She did not hate him. And yet she was gone, living a life apart from his, and he had no way of knowing whether their paths would ever cross again. He wrote back immediately, a long, searching letter in which he tried to express everything he felt: the guilt, the anger toward their father, the strange grief of discovering family only to lose it. He told her about the changes he was making at Bellera, about his growing discomfort with the system he was embedded in, about his uncertainty over what to do with the power and privilege he had inherited. Her reply came a month later, and its words altered the course of his life. She told him that no one could decide his path for him, but she could share what she had learned. The past could not be changed, she wrote, but it did not have to be repeated. He owned 170 people, 170 human beings whose lives rested in his hands. He could not free them all without destroying himself. The economic and legal consequences would be devastating, and the courts would likely prevent it anyway, but he could treat them with dignity. He could keep families together. He could teach them to read, give them skills, prepare them for the day when the system finally collapsed. And it would collapse, she insisted. It could not last forever. He could be the kind of master who made slavery slightly less brutal, even while working toward a world in which masters were no longer necessary. It would never be enough, she admitted, but it would be something, and something was better than nothing. Henri followed Margot's advice as carefully as he could. He introduced changes at Bellera slowly, deliberately, in ways that would not immediately draw the attention of his neighbors or the authorities. He refused to separate families, turning down lucrative offers to purchase individual workers no matter price. He established a school and made attendance mandatory for all children under 12, arguing to skeptical overseers that educated workers were more valuable. He reduced the crushing quotas of the harvest season, accepting lower profits in exchange for less suffering. He improved the living quarters, ensuring adequate food, clothing, and medical care. He abolished the whip as punishment, replacing it with a system of privileges and restrictions that was less violent, though still rooted in control. His neighbors noticed. They commented on his softness, his impracticality, his dangerous ideas. Some stopped doing business with him altogether. Others warned him he was setting a troubling precedent, that his workers would grow spoiled and difficult to manage. A few suggested, only half in jest, that he might be an abolitionist sympathizer, an accusation that carried real danger in Louisiana in the late 1840s. But Henri persisted. He could not free the people he owned. The barriers were too great, but he could make their lives less unbearable. He could prepare them for a future he hoped would come, even if he could not yet imagine how. He and Margot continued to write to one another. She told him she had opened a small school in New Orleans, teaching free people of color and enslaved people whose owners allowed them to attend. It was dangerous work. Education was viewed as a threat to the social order, and laws strictly limited what enslaved people were permitted to learn. Yet she pursued it with quiet resolve, finding ways to operate within the system while subtly undermining it. She wrote that she was teaching them what her mother had taught her, that knowledge was power, that dignity was not something others could grant or revoke, that they were fully human regardless of what the law declared. It was small work, she admitted, but it was her work. It was how she chose to live within the world their father had helped create. Henri admired her courage even as he recognized how much it had cost her to acquire it, and he wondered often whether he would ever truly be worthy of the grace she had shown him. He worried constantly for her safety. New Orleans was more tolerant than the rural parishes, but even their tolerance had its limits. A free woman of color who was too educated, too independent, too outspoken could quickly become a target. The system had many ways of punishing those who challenged it, some subtle, others brutally direct. His fears were realized in September of 1849, when he received a frantic letter from one of Margot's students. The school had been raided by local authorities after complaint was lodged by someone who objected to enslaved people being taught to read. Margot had been arrested for teaching enslaved people without permission, for possessing abolitionist literature, and for a dozen other charges that all amounted to the same crime: being too free, too defiant of the social order. Henri traveled to New Orleans immediately, leaving Bellera in the hands of his most trusted overseer. He called in every favor he possessed, used every connection his family name still commanded, and spent money he could scarcely afford to spend. It took 3 days and a substantial bribe delivered to the right officials, but he finally secured her release from the parish jail. When he saw her, she was thinner, with bruises along her arms and a cut above her eye that had not yet fully healed. But her spirit was unbroken. Her eyes were still bright, still fierce with determination. "I won't stop," she told him as they sat in a small cafe near the river, speaking in low voices to avoid attention. "I can't stop. This is the only thing that makes sense to me. The only way I know how to fight back against what was done to me, to my mother, to all of us." "You'll get yourself killed," Henri said bluntly, fear roughening his voice. "Then I'll die free," Margot replied calmly, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "That's more than my mother had, more than most people like me ever get. I won't live in fear, Henri. I won't make myself small to keep others comfortable. I've spent too much of my life doing that already." Henri wanted to argue, to beg her to be more cautious, to protect herself, but he knew it would be useless. She had found her purpose, the thing that gave meaning to her suffering, and he had no right to take that from her, even if it terrified him. "Let me help," he said instead. "Money, connections, whatever you need. Let me be useful." Margot smiled, and for a moment he saw the sister she might have been if they had grown up together, if the world had been kinder. "You already are useful, Henri," she said. "You're proving that people can change, that they can choose to be better than the systems they inherit. That matters more than you know. Every person you treat with dignity, every family you keep together, every child you teach to read, it all matters. You're planting seeds for a future you may never see, but that doesn't make the work any less important." The years passed, and the country moved steadily toward the conflict everyone sensed, but no one seemed able to prevent. Tensions between North and South sharpened. Debates over slavery grew more violent, and compromise became increasingly impossible. Henri continued his work at Bellera, making incremental changes, treating the people he owned with as much dignity as the system allowed, and preparing them for a future he hoped would be different. Margot continued her school, relocating often to stay ahead of authorities, teaching anyone willing to learn. In New Orleans, she became known as someone who could be trusted, someone who helped enslaved people learn to read, who provided papers for those seeking escape, who offered shelter to those in danger. It was perilous work, but she seemed to thrive in it, finding purpose in the very risks that frightened her brother. They saw each other rarely. The social complications of their relationship made frequent contact dangerous, and Henry's growing reputation as an abolitionist sympathizer made open association risky for Margot as well. But they wrote often. Their letters became a quiet record of two people trying to build something like family across barriers of history, law, and trauma. In 1853, Margot wrote with news that surprised him. She was engaged to be married. The man was a free person of color, a carpenter named Thomas Laurent, who had built a successful business in New Orleans. From her description, he was kind, intelligent, and supportive of her work. "I never thought I would marry," she wrote. "I never thought I would trust anyone enough to share my life with them. But Thomas truly sees me, not as property, not as a symbol, not as a problem to be solved, but as myself. He knows my history, knows about our father, knows about you, and he loves me anyway. It is a gift I never expected to receive." Henri traveled to New Orleans for the wedding, a small ceremony held in a Catholic church in the French Quarter. He sat in the back, careful not to draw attention, and watched his sister marry a man who looked at her with unmistakable love and respect. When Margot caught his eye during the ceremony, she smiled, and Henri felt something loosen in his chest. A knot of guilt and grief he had carried since that Christmas morning 6 years earlier. After the ceremony, they spoke briefly in the courtyard. Thomas shook Henry's hand with a grip that was firm but not aggressive, his eyes assessing Henri with the practiced judgment of someone who had learned to read people for survival. "Thank you for coming," Margot said, her hand resting on Thomas's arm. "It means a great deal to me." "I wouldn't have missed it," Henri replied, and he meant it. "I'm truly happy for you." "I know." She squeezed his hand in a brief gesture of affection that would have been ordinary between other siblings, but felt precious and fragile between them. "And I'm grateful for everything you've done, everything you continue to do. You're a good man, Henri. Our father would be proud." Henri wasn't sure that was true. He suspected his father would have been horrified by the choices he had made, by the way he had disrupted the careful arrangements that had kept Margot hidden and controlled. But it no longer mattered what his father would have thought. What mattered was that Margot was free, loved, and building a life on her own terms. That was enough. Henri returned to Belleroy and continued his work, watching the political situation deteriorate, knowing that the world he had been born into was ending. When war finally came in 1861, he felt an unexpected sense of relief, as if the long, unbearable tension had finally broken. Maintaining an untenable system, trying to be humane inside an inhumane structure, had exhausted him. When the war years came, they were brutal. Belleroy was occupied by Union forces in 1862, and Henri found himself in the strange position of welcoming the very army that was destroying his economic livelihood. By military order, the enslaved people on his plantation were declared free. Most left immediately, searching for family members who had been sold away or simply wanting to experience what it meant to move freely through the world. Henri did not try to stop them. He gave what money he could spare, wrote letters of reference to those who wanted them, and wished them well. Some thanked him, acknowledging the ways he had tried to make their lives less terrible. Others left without a word, their silence more eloquent than any speech. A reminder that no measure of kindness could erase the fundamental wrong of ownership. When the war ended in 1865, Belleroy was a shell of what it had been. The fields were overgrown, the machinery broken, and the grand house showed years of neglect that would require money he no longer had to repair. He sold most of the land, keeping only the house and a few surrounding acres, enough to live modestly, but nowhere near the life he had been born into. At 49, the world he had known was gone. In 1868, 3 years after the war's end, Henri received a letter from Margot inviting him to visit her in New Orleans. She and Thomas had survived the war, though not without loss. Their school had been destroyed during the occupation, their home damaged, their savings depleted, but they had rebuilt. The school now operated openly and legally, teaching formerly enslaved people to read, write, and navigate their new freedom. Henri took the train to New Orleans, passing through a landscape still scarred by war. Fields lying fallow, buildings standing empty. People everywhere trying to understand what the new world would demand of them. The city itself was chaotic, crowded with soldiers, freedmen, and opportunists, all attempting to carve out a place in the emerging order. Margot met him at the station, and Henri was struck by how much she had changed. She was 34 now, her face marked by hard years, but there was a confidence in her bearing that had been absent before. She moved the world like someone who belonged in it, who had every right to take up space, to decide, to be heard. "Welcome," she said, embracing him without hesitation. The gesture was natural, unforced, the kind of greeting siblings might share anywhere, and it tightened Henri's throat. "Come," she said, "see what we've built." The school occupied a former warehouse converted into classrooms and a small library. It was full of students of all ages, from children to elderly men and women who had spent their entire lives enslaved and were now learning to read for the first time. Thomas was teaching mathematics, his voice patient as he explained fractions to a group of attentive adults. "This is what freedom looks like," Margot said, watching with unmistakable pride. "It's messy and difficult and uncertain, but it's real. These people are building lives, making choices, learning skills. They're becoming who they were always meant to be." Tears pricked Henri's eyes. "Your mother would be proud." "Yes," Margot replied softly. "She would. And I think our father would be too, despite everything. He wanted this for me. He just didn't have the courage to make it happen himself. But in the end, his weakness led to something good. It led to you freeing me, which led to the school, which changes lives every day. Sometimes good things grow out of bad beginnings." They spent the afternoon walking through the city, talking about the past and the future, about a country struggling to rebuild itself from the ashes of war. Margot spoke of plans to expand the school, to create more opportunities for freed men and women trying to establish themselves in a society that still met them with suspicion and hostility. "Will you help?" she asked as they stood on the levee, watching the Mississippi roll past. "I know you don't have much left, but whatever you can spare, money, connections, advice, it would matter." "Of course," Henri said without hesitation. "Whatever I have is yours. It always has been." Margot smiled and took his hand, a simple gesture that felt profound. "We're family, Henri. Really, truly family. Not because the law says so, but because we choose to be. That's what freedom means. The ability to choose who we are and who we love." As the sun set over Mississippi, turning the water gold and orange, Henri understood that this was what redemption looked like. Not a single dramatic act or moment of perfect clarity, but a long, difficult process of choosing better, of trying to repair what had been broken, of building something new from the ruins of the past. He had inherited his father's sins, but he had also inherited the chance to do better. With Margot's courage, her vision, and her refusal to be defined by what had been done to her, he was learning how. It would never be enough to erase the past. Nothing could undo the years Margot had spent enslaved, the suffering of the hundreds who had labored at Bellera, or the countless families torn apart by the system. But it was something, and as Margot had written years earlier, something was better than nothing. They were siblings at last in the way they should have been from the beginning. Not master and slave, not owner and property, but two people connected by blood and choice, working together to build a world in which the horrors they had known would become impossible. It was a small victory in a country still wrestling with the legacy of slavery, but it was theirs, earned through pain, courage, and a refusal to accept that the past must dictate the future. In the end, that was all anyone could do, take the broken pieces they had been given and try to build something better. The story of Henri and Margot Dufresne ended not with perfect resolution, but with hope. And sometimes, in a world as broken as there's been, hope is enough. This mystery shows us that the darkest secrets often lie not in supernatural forces, but in human choices and the systems people perpetuate. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed, or are there still secrets buried in Louisiana's past? Leave your comment below. If you enjoyed this tale and want more historical mysteries like this, subscribe to Liturgy of Fear, hit the notification bell, and share it with someone who loves dark stories from America's past. See you in the next.